What if the girl everyone called broken was the only one who had been listening all along? What if the man who bought her to save her ended up discovering a truth no one ever bothered to see? The snow had been falling for 3 long days, covering the small Montana town of Cold River in thick white silence. The air smelled of smoke, winter, and something sad that clung to every corner like a shadow. In the middle of Main Street, a wagon stood parked outside the general store. A young woman sat inside it, wrapped in a thin shawl and holding her hands tightly in her lap. Her name was Norah Vale. She was pale from cold, her lips nearly colorless, her eyes distant, the way people look when they stop expecting anything good from the world. Her stillness made the townsfolk uneasy. Everyone knew what was happening, even if no one said a word. Norah was being sold like an old chair or a sick mule. Beside the wagon stood Martha Vale, Norah's stepmother, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cold air. She scolded a man loading sacks of flour and barley. "Hurry up! Elias Boon will be here any minute. I'm not freezing out here for nothing," she snapped. The man nodded nervously. No one liked dealing with Martha. She had a look in her eyes like she would bite if pushed too far. Rumor said she didn't treat Norah kindly. Rumor also said Norah was deaf since childhood, and Martha saw no reason to keep someone who couldn't work or bring value. The store door swung open, letting out a warm breath of heat. A tall man stepped out, adjusting his hat against the falling snow. Elias Boon. He was a quiet rancher, known for his steady hands and lonely life. He had lost his wife years ago and lived with nothing but cattle, horses, and the silence of open land. People respected him, but they also pitied him. A man too gentle for the wild world around him. Martha's tone changed as soon as she saw him. "Mr. Boon, right on time," she said, pretending sweetness. "Got you a girl who won't talk your ear off. She can't hear nothing, quiet as a stone." Elias looked at Norah. His breath caught for a second. She sat perfectly still, but her eyes were wide open, watching everything. They weren't dull, they weren't empty, they were full of something he couldn't name. "She can't hear at all?" he asked. "Not a thing," Martha said quickly. "Doctor said she's useless for housework. Can't follow orders if she can't hear them." He frowned, his gaze drifting to Norah again. Snowflakes rested on her dark hair. She didn't move, she didn't blink. "Why are you selling her?" he asked softly. Martha's smile twitched. "Kindness, Mr. Boon. I can't afford to keep a girl who's no help. Better she goes to someone who needs an extra pair of hands." Elias didn't fully believe her, but he looked down at the paper she held out. His chest tightened. He didn't like the idea of buying a person. But he also knew what would happen if he walked away. Someone worse might take her. Someone who didn't care whether she lived another week. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch of coins. It was all he had brought. Martha grabbed the money so fast it startled him. "She's yours now," she said, waving him off. Norah didn't look back at her stepmother, not once. She only held the shawl tighter around her shoulders as Elias guided her into his wagon. The road to his ranch was long and white, the snow so deep that the horses had to push hard through the drifts. Norah sat wrapped in a blanket Elias had handed her, staring straight ahead. He tried talking softly to her a few times, though he didn't expect an answer. "My name is Elias," he said gently. "We're heading to my place north of the creek. You'll have your own bed. There's warm stew waiting. And a fire." She didn't move, but he noticed something. Every time he spoke, her fingers tightened slightly around the blanket, as if she felt the sound somehow. By the time they reached the ranch, dusk had settled over the valley. Elias helped her down, careful not to startle her. She flinched anyway, but only at first. Inside the cabin, the fire's glow softened the room, filling it with heat and the smell of stewed venison. "Sit," he said kindly, pointing at the chair. She sat, her posture stiff. He placed a bowl in front of her. She picked up the spoon with shaking hands and ate slowly. Elias watched her, not judging, not pushing. He knew silence better than anyone. Sometimes silence was the only thing that didn't hurt. After she finished, he brought out a small slate board and chalk. "You can write?" he asked, making the motion clear with his hands. She hesitated, then took the chalk and wrote 2 words. "Thank you." Elias felt something tug inside his chest. "You don't owe me anything," he said, even though she couldn't hear. "You just rest." Norah stared at him a moment, unsure. No one had spoken to her with kindness in a long time. Maybe ever. He set a quilt on the small bed in the corner and motioned for her to sleep there. When he stepped outside to check the horses, she sat by the fire, touching her ears gently. She squeezed her eyes shut. She could almost hear something. The crackle of the fire. The faint whistle of winter wind. Something small but real. By the time Elias came back, she was asleep under the quilt. He stood there a moment, watching the way peace softened her face. "You're safe now?" he whispered. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something warm and new began to settle in the quiet space between them. The morning came pale and cold, the sky bright with frost. Elias stepped out early to feed the horses while the cabin warmed slowly behind him. Inside, Norah woke to the soft glow of firelight. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was warm. The air smelled of pine. There were no footsteps stomping toward her, no angry voices, no fear. Then she remembered. The sail. The snow. Elias Boon. She sat up and held the quilt to her chest. It was warm in a way she wasn't used to. Her stepmother had only given her thin blankets, always saying she didn't deserve more. The cabin door opened with a soft creak. Elias stepped in, brushing snow from his coat. He froze when he saw her awake and sitting on the edge of the bed. "Mornin'," he said gently, careful not to move too fast. "You sleep all right?" She watched his lips, trying to understand. His voice was low and calm, without sharp edges. She didn't know his words, but she knew his tone. It didn't hurt like the tones she'd known before. He pointed to the table, where he'd set a bowl of warm porridge and a cup of milk. She walked over slowly and sat. He worked around the cabin, carving something from a small block of pine while she ate. Every so often she watched him, trying to read the shape of his silence. After breakfast, he showed her around the ranch. He didn't use words. He used hands, small motions, slow steps. She followed him through the barn, the corral, the creek frozen like a sheet of glass. She memorized each spot quickly, her eyes moving with quiet care. When he pointed for her to gather kindling, she nodded and moved without hesitation. Her body remembered work even if her ears did not. While she worked, Elias watched from a distance. There was something about her, a strength beneath the fear, a way she moved without wasting anything. She didn't look like someone broken. She looked like someone surviving. By mid-morning, snow began falling again. Norah carried a basket of wood back to the cabin, her cheeks pink from the cold. Elias placed another log on the fire, then picked up the slate and chalk. "You like it here?" he wrote. She read it, then took the chalk. "It is quiet." His mouth curved into a small smile. "That's how I like it." She hesitated, then wrote again beneath the first line. "Quiet is not the same as peace." Elias felt the words settle heavy on his chest. He knew that truth far too well. Silence could be safe, or silence could be a cage. He set the slate down and nodded once, slowly, letting her know he understood. As the hours passed, the storm grew stronger. The wind picked up, throwing snow against the windows hard enough to shake the glass. Norah flinched each time. Her hands trembled. She kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting someone terrible to burst through it. Elias noticed. He set more wood on the fire, keeping his movements slow. "You're safe," he whispered, touching his chest, then pointing gently toward her. Safe. Her breathing steadied a little. They sat by the fire as the storm roared outside. Elias carved the pine block until it became the shape of a small horse. Its legs were uneven, but it looked proud in its own way. When he handed it to her, Norah stared, eyes wide. She traced the rough grooves, her fingers soft and slow. A tiny smile touched her lips, the first real one he'd seen from her. That night, wind rattled the cabin as if trying to get inside. Elias worked by the fire, repairing a leather strap, while Norah watched the snow blow hard against the window. Her shoulders were tight, her body stiff with fear. He set aside the strap and moved closer. "You all right?" he asked softly, even though she couldn't truly hear. She didn't respond. She only stared at the dark tree line beyond the window, shaking her head slowly. Old memories she couldn't escape lived somewhere in that dark. She walked to the table and picked up the slate. Her hand trembled as she wrote. "He came at night." Elias frowned. "Who?" Her jaw tightened. She wrote again, with shaking strokes. "My stepmother's husband." She dropped the chalk. It cracked on the floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, her breath shaking. Elias felt heat rise in his chest, not anger at her, but at the man who had put fear in her eyes. He picked up the slate and wrote in firm strokes. "No one will touch you again." Norah stared at the words, then at him. Her lips parted in a shaky breath. She had lived with fear for so long she didn't know what safety felt like. But she could see something honest in Elias's face. Something steady. Later that night, thunder cracked far away. Norah jumped, startled, eyes wide with panic. Elias moved to her immediately, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. "It's all right," he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes confused, scared. He lifted one hand and made a slow motion from his heart to hers. "Safe here." Her breath trembled. She lifted her hand and touched her own chest, repeating his motion. Then, something unexpected happened. A low rumble of thunder rolled again through the valley. Norah flinched, but then looked toward the sound. Elias froze. "You heard that," he whispered. She didn't answer with words, but her eyes told him he wasn't wrong. She had heard something. Not fully, not clearly, but enough for her to react. He moved closer, his voice barely more than a breath. "You've heard more than they ever knew, haven't you?" Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand to her ear, then nodded once. Small, but real. Elias felt something shift deep inside him. She wasn't deaf. Not completely. Not the way they said. Norah looked at him, scared and hopeful at the same time, as if waiting for him to be angry. But Elias wasn't angry. He was amazed. He lifted the slate again and wrote one word. "Beautiful." She held the slate, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. Then she wrote beneath his word with small, fragile strokes. "Not useless." Elias swallowed hard and whispered, "You never were." The storm outside raged, but inside the cabin something warm and tender began to grow. Their shoulders brushed. She stayed close. He didn't move away. Norah had lived her whole life in forced silence. But tonight, the world had started whispering back. Spring came slowly to the mountains that year. The snow melted in quiet streams, the earth softened, and the wind carried the scent of pine and new life across the valley. The world was waking up again. Inside Elias Boon's cabin, something else was waking too. Norah moved through the home with a new calmness. She hummed now, soft and breathy, almost like she was testing her own voice. Sometimes she heard things clearly. Sometimes she only felt them. But every sound, every little whisper of the world, brought tears to her eyes. Elias noticed everything. The way she paused when birds sang nearby. The way she tilted her head when he spoke, trying to catch his voice. The way she smiled when she managed to hear even a tiny sound. He tried not to show how much it affected him, but every time she heard something new, his heart pulled tight, as if he had been waiting for this moment without knowing. One bright morning, Norah stood on the porch, watching mist rise from the valley. Elias stepped out with 2 cups of warm milk. She smiled at him. That small, shy smile was becoming more familiar now, but it never lost its softness. He took a breath. "I'm going to the trading post tomorrow," he said slowly, letting her see his lips. "Been months since I've gone." She watched his mouth, then pointed at herself and raised her brows. "You want to come?" he guessed with a grin. She nodded quickly. "Then you'll come," he said. "It's time folks saw the truth about you." She looked down, embarrassed, but her smile stayed. The next day, the trail to the trading post was long but kind. Norah rode beside Elias, steady and calm. The mountains shone under a bright blue sky. Elias kept stealing glances at her. She looked like someone tasting freedom for the first time, like the world was bigger than she ever believed. When they reached the trading post, people turned to stare. Some whispered, some blinked in surprise. Norah Vale, the quiet girl who had been sold like a broken object, was now riding beside the loneliest, kindest man in the valley, and she looked nothing like the rumors. Elias helped her down, offering his hand. "You're safe," he said quietly. She nodded even before she fully understood the word. She felt it from him. Inside the post, they traded for flour, coffee, a new pair of boots for Elias, and ribbon Norah kept touching shyly. They were halfway through their supplies when a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Well, I'll be damned." Elias turned fast. Martha Vale stood near the doorway, her face painted in cold anger. Norah's stepmother. The woman who sold her. The woman whose husband Norah feared. Norah froze on the spot, her breath stopping in her throat. Martha's eyes swept over her like she owned her. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again, girl," Martha said, stepping forward. "Did you cry till he bought you?" Poor Elias always had a soft heart. Elias moved slightly in front of Norah, jaw tight. "Watch your mouth," he warned. Martha ignored him. "She ain't right in the head. Doctor said she couldn't even—" "Enough," Elias said, voice like a distant storm. But Martha only grew louder. "She's mine, sold legally." "Sheriff Oaks, this man is keeping my stepdaughter against her will." Quote. People turned. Whispers filled the shop. Elias clenched his fists. Norah trembled behind him, eyes wide with old fear. Sheriff Oaks stepped forward, folding his arms. "Martha, you want to explain yourself?" he asked. "She belongs to me," Martha snapped. "And she can't speak for herself anyway." That was the moment the world shifted. Norah stepped around Elias. Her legs shook, her chin trembled, her hands clenched, but she stepped forward. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft and rough, like a newborn sound, but it carried through the trading post as clear as a bell. "I am not yours." Every head turned. Gasps ran through the crowd. Martha stumbled back as if slapped. You can talk?" Martha choked out. Norah took another trembling breath. "You sold me," she said, voice thin but steady. "You said I was useless, that no one would want me, but you were wrong." Martha looked around wildly as the sheriff's face hardened. "Martha," Sheriff Oaks said, "you're done talking." Elias stepped close to Norah, his hand resting gently on her back. She leaned into him like his presence held her steady. The sheriff turned to them. "She goes home with whoever she chooses," he said simply. Norah didn't look at him. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked only at Elias. "I choose him," she whispered. Martha's face twisted, but she could do nothing. Her lies, her cruelty, her years of power, they fell apart like dust. She turned and stormed out of the post, her anger chasing her down the road. Norah's breath shook. Elias turned to her slowly. "I heard you," he whispered. She lifted her face, tears shining. "I heard you too," she said softly. They rode home under a warm spring sky. Norah leaned against Elias the whole way, the world no longer silent. That night, after dinner, after the fire burned low, after the long fear inside her finally let go, she sat beside Elias on the small couch near the hearth. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm curled around her waist. The fire cast soft gold light across her face. "You know what I thought when I first saw you?" he murmured. "Scared," she said with a small smile. He chuckled softly. "A little, but mostly, I thought you looked like something the world didn't deserve." She looked up at him, heart in her eyes. "And now?" He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Now I know I was right." She leaned in first. He met her halfway. Their kiss was soft, slow, full of everything they had survived. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Elias?" "Yeah?" He breathed. "I hear you," she said. And she smiled, bright, warm, full of life. Outside, dawn rose over the valley, lighting the world in gold. Inside, Norah heard the wind, the crackle of the fire, the soft beat of the man she loved. They said she would never hear. They said she would never speak. The love had a voice of its own.